Mark was a man of predictable habits. For 15 years, his life was a perfect circle. He lived in a small apartment where the clock ticked loudly, reminding him that time was passing, even if he wasn't doing anything with it. Every morning, the sun hit his face at exactly 7 a.m. He didn't need an alarm clock. His body was a machine of routine. He would walk to the kitchen, boil water, and make the same bitter black coffee. He didn't like the taste, but he liked the familiarity. Change to Mark was a dangerous word. After breakfast, he put on his gray coat, the same coat he had worn for 5 winters, and walked exactly 850 steps to the Willow Creek Library. The library was his fortress. He loved the smell of old paper and the silence of the dusty shelves. In the library, Mark was the king of a quiet kingdom. He felt safe there because books didn't ask him questions. Books didn't tell him he was wasting his youth. To Mark, the world outside the library's heavy oak doors was a chaotic place. It was too loud, too fast, and full of people who were always in a hurry to go nowhere. He preferred to stay in his comfort zone, surrounded by the stories of people who were much braver than him. However, beneath his calm face, there was a hidden loneliness. Sometimes, while organizing the history books, he would stop and look out the window at the birds flying south. For a brief second, he would feel a sharp pain in his chest, a feeling of disappointment. He realized that his life was like a book with 500 pages, but every single page was exactly the same. He was 35 years old, but he felt like he had only lived one day, repeated thousands of times. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. Mark was working in the old travel section, a part of the library that nobody ever visited. He was cleaning the dust off a very old green book titled The Hidden Paths of Europe. As he moved the book, a small blue envelope slid and fell to the floor. It wasn't a modern envelope. The paper was thick, and the color was the deep blue of the ocean. On the front, written in elegant gold ink, were the words, "To the person who wants to see the world." Mark's hands started to shake. He felt a strange curiosity that he hadn't felt since he was a child. His heart, which usually beat like a slow drum, began to race. He looked around to see if anyone was watching. The library was empty. He wanted to throw the letter in the trash. He wanted to run away from it. But for the first time in his life, he couldn't follow his routine. He put the letter in his pocket, his fingers cold with a mixture of fear and excitement. He didn't know it yet, but the wall he had built around his life was starting to crack. Mark walked home that evening, but he didn't count his 850 steps as usual. His mind was elsewhere. The small blue envelope in his pocket felt as heavy as a mountain. When he entered his apartment, the familiar silence greeted him, but it didn't feel like a sanctuary anymore. It felt like a cage. He sat on his old velvet sofa for hours, just staring at the blue paper on his coffee table. "I am just a librarian," he whispered to the empty room. "I am a man who organizes the adventures of others. I don't belong in the mountains or the big, bright cities." He felt a deep, cold anxiety in his chest. It was a physical pain, like a tight knot that wouldn't open. Mark knew that if he opened that letter, his quiet, orderly life might change forever. He started to hesitate. He picked up a matchbox, thinking it would be safer to burn the letter and forget it ever existed.
One part of him, the part that loved his routine, wanted to destroy the mystery and go back to his bitter coffee and dusty shelves. But another part of him, a small, quiet voice he hadn't heard since he was 10 years old, whispered, "What if there is more to life than safety? What if you are meant to be more than a shadow?" He spent the entire night walking around his small apartment. Every time he passed the mirror in the hallway, he stopped to look at his reflection. He didn't recognize the man looking back at him. He saw a man who was tired of being secure. He saw someone who was dying slowly in a world of certainty. The conflict was painful. It was the safety of the known versus the terrifying magic of the unknown. He opened his window and looked out at the city lights. Millions of people were out there, living, crying, and laughing. Meanwhile, he was hiding. He felt terrified of making a mistake. He imagined getting lost in a foreign country, not being able to speak the language and having no one to help him. But then, an even darker thought arrived. He was even more afraid of staying the same forever. He was afraid of waking up at 65 and realizing that his most exciting memory was cleaning a bookshelf. The clock on the wall ticked, monotonous and loud. Every tick was a second of his life that he would never get back. His inner conflict reached its peak. He picked up the letter, then put it down. He walked to the kitchen, then came back. He was a man caught between two worlds, the one he knew and the one he dreamed of. His hands were sweating and his breath was shallow. He realized that the greatest obstacle wasn't the distance to another country, it was the distance between his heart and his courage.
The clock on the wall struck 5 a.m. The first light of the sun began to bleed through the curtains, turning the room a soft, pale gray. Mark sat at his kitchen table, his eyes red from a night without sleep. He realized that the sun would rise whether he was brave or not. Time didn't care about his anxiety. With a deep breath that tasted like old dust and new hope, Mark finally gathered his courage. His fingers were trembling so much that he almost tore the paper. He slowly opened the blue envelope. He expected a map, a ticket, or perhaps a long letter from a long-lost relative. But inside, there was only a small, square piece of white card. On it, written in the same elegant gold ink, was a single sentence. "The best view comes after the hardest climb. Go to the train station today and buy a ticket to a place you cannot pronounce." Mark stared at the words. There was no money, there was no plan, there was only a challenge. Suddenly, the heavy weight in his chest didn't feel like fear anymore. It felt like adrenaline. He looked around his apartment, at the silent books, the gray walls, and the cold coffee. He realized that if he stayed here one more day, he would disappear. Mark didn't pack a large suitcase. He didn't even pack his favorite book. He just grabbed his old gray coat and walked out the door. For the first time in 15 years, he didn't walk the 850 steps to the library. He walked past his usual bus stop. He didn't look back at the building where he had spent half his life. He headed straight to the central train station. When he arrived, the station was a vibrant sea of people. Everyone was going somewhere. Mark stood in front of the massive electronic departure board. His heart was racing, beating against his ribs like a trapped bird. He saw names of cities he had only read about in the old travel section. He saw a small town high in the Alps with a name full of strange consonants that he couldn't even begin to say. He walked to the ticket counter. The woman behind the glass looked at him, waiting. Mark pointed his finger at the strange name on the screen. "One way, please," he said. His voice was cracked, but it was firm. As he stepped onto the train, a sudden sense of relief washed over him. He sat by the window and watched the station disappear. He wasn't a librarian anymore. He was a traveler. He realized that fear was not a wall designed to stop him, but a door designed to be opened. He didn't know where he was going, and for the first time in his life, he didn't care. He decided to embrace the beautiful uncertainty of his new journey. The man who was afraid of the world was gone. In his place was a man who was finally, truly awake. Growth and comfort do not coexist. You cannot discover new oceans if you are afraid to lose sight of the shore. Mark didn't find a treasure in that letter. He found his own courage. If you are waiting for a sign to change your life, this is it. Don't wait for a blue envelope. Take the first step today.